Hi, everyone. Hi, Chris.
Hello. How are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Firstly, thank you so much for coming here this evening. For those of you who don't know, Zachary's flown over especially for this, and although have planned some business around this, it's great to have him do that for us. I thought it would be best to start tonight by looking actually at how you started. You're not born into a family of actors or those in the entertainment industry, and so have had little exposure in that regard. I wonder, therefore, what led you to take up acting?
I was born into a family that was pretty creative. You know, my father in particular, he was a hairdresser by trade, but he was a kind of Renaissance man in a way. He was an amazing photographer and visual artist and musician, and while he didn't formalize any of that in his vocation, it was something that he really engaged in his life. So he lived a very creative life. And my mom also followed suit and fell into his orbit, I think, in a lot of ways. So there was a lot of creativity in my childhood, in my early childhood. Sadly, my father passed away when I was very young, when I was 7. And I think that had a lot to do with it, actually. I think for me, performing became a kind of outlet. It became a kind of way for me to process emotions that were bigger than I was able to handle at that time. And so what was a natural, expressive personality became something a little bit more focused as I went into adolescence, particularly into middle school. And then it was one of those things that I just found my way to and knew immediately that it was where I had to be. And luckily my circumstances and my opportunities allowed that to flourish. My mom was really supportive. You know, she was a single mom raising 2 young kids and had to go to work, which she hadn't ever done before. And so I think it became an outlet for me. It was somewhere where she knew I could be safe when I was in class or when I was doing a show, and it was somewhere where I felt safe and where I felt like I could explore my emotional landscape.
Thank you. Acting is quite an umbrella term, and I think that's no more true than for you. You haven't just been on television, you haven't just been in film, you've been on stage, you've done the whole works. Do you see acting as those different sectors or as acting as a whole, and how do you approach, if you do see them individually, how do you approach each differently? And have you got a favorite? Do you prefer to be in film or television?
Theater is my favorite, hands down, no question. If I could make the same kind of living that I make doing film and television, doing theater, there's no doubt that that's all I would do. Unfortunately, the disparity between what actors on stage are paid and what actors on TV and film are paid is too vast to calculate. But yeah, theater to me is also where I started. I found my way to theater training and started working on stage when I was quite young, when I was about 10 years old. So I feel most comfortable there in that mode of expression. And I do see the techniques as very different, actually. You know, not so much between television and film, but between theater and television film. It's quite a different experience. You know, theater is really the only medium of them where the actor is responsible for the storytelling every night. You know, the curtain goes up, and we are the ones who take the audience moment by moment through the experience. Whereas when you do a film or a television show, you show up, you do your work, you make your contribution, you leave, and then the editor comes in, the sound designer, the composer. I mean, there are so many facets of the collaboration that happen after we go home that it becomes much less in our control. And I also love the aspect of theater where you share an experience with the audience in real time. There's nothing like breathing the same air and taking people on a journey that is surprising and revelatory and cathartic often. That's a unique experience. And there's something devotional about it. You know, you can trace theater back to origins of worship and celebration, and there's something spiritual about it, honestly, and not to sound too hoity about it, but there's something about showing up every night and saying the same lines and standing in the same place, and that kind of devotional pattern, I think, reveals creative discoveries in a different way. It goes deeper over time. Film and television, I feel, is a lot about instinct and connection and being open and available. And theater is about devotion, and that to me is really appealing.
It's interesting that you say that theatre is probably your favourite aspect, because many people here will be probably here because of being your role as Spock in Star Trek. And I guess my question is, have you found since starting that first film, when you played Spock, that you won't be able to develop into another role, something as iconic? It could be difficult to go into theatre now because people will see you as the iconic Spock in Star Trek.
No, I don't agree with that. I don't. I mean, first of all, I think attention spans have diminished and truncated so much in the last 60 years since, 55 years since Star Trek premiered on TV, when 30 million people would tune into one episode of Star Trek because there were only 3 channels to choose from in 1967, you know? So I think attention span has something to do with it, or lack of attention span. And then I also think that commercial theater is so driven by box office revenue, and box office revenue is driven by recognizability. And I feel like if people who know me as Spock want to see what else I'm doing, and they come find me on stage, and that translates into attention paid to work that I might do in the theater. So I don't feel limited by it. No, I feel like it was a great springboard for me to have some leverage to do a wider range of things as an artist, you know, produce as I do, and decide kind of what stories I want to tell.
Interesting. Well, let's discuss Spock a little bit more, because I'm sure that will please the crowds, perhaps. You did campaign quite hard for the role of Spock. Why was it so important? Why was the role so important to you?
I don't know that the role was so important to me as much as I knew that I was really right for it. I mean, I never watched Star Trek when I was a kid. I wasn't a huge Star Trek fan. I would turn the channel if it was on the TV. Don't tell anybody. But you know,
shocked faces all around now.
Right? Mouths just agape. No, I definitely appreciated it, but I wasn't a big TV kid. It wasn't my outlet really. So. For me, it was much more about the opportunity creatively, and I would say the engine of that was J.J. Abrams and the opportunity to work with J.J. I can remember years before Star Trek came along I was riding a stationary bike at the gym and reading the newspaper, and there was this profile of J.J., and I remember, you know, it was in the LA Times, and I remember reading about his process and how he got to where he was. And this was in the earlier days of Bad Robot, you know, well before Trek or Star Wars or any of the subsequent successes that he's experienced. And I just felt so inspired by him, you know, and I felt like he motivated me in that moment to work harder and push myself. You know, I started pedaling faster and feeling like it was a goal to work with someone of that stature and that creative, just genius, really. And so it was really driven by that. And the fact that I knew that I was physically very right for the role, and just that my nature was really very much in line with who that character is in so many important ways, not in all ways, but in so many important ways. And I think that's really, for film and television in particular, I think you, as an actor, need to inherently possess at least a significant amount of the qualities of the character in order to inhabit it, in order to be believable, you know, and especially a character that iconic. So that was a big motivation for me. And it was a great career move. I mean, you know, to speak crassly about it, it was a great job to get, you know, a franchise film and one of the leading roles in a franchise film that would go on for years and give me other opportunities. So I wasn't naive to that, you know.
Well, obviously one of the main people who influenced who would take up the role was Leonard Nimoy, and did you ever say that to him? You saying it wasn't necessarily important, but I just knew it was right for the role. Did you explain that to him? I'm sure.
Yeah, Leonard knew. I mean, what I could never have imagined, Leonard was very supportive from the beginning, and he had casting consultation because he was also in that first film, and so he had contractual consultation rights. So I wouldn't have gotten the role without his support. He saw my audition tape and connected with JJ when he was in the process of casting. So I knew that he supported me from the beginning, but I never could have imagined how close we would become. Leonard became like a father figure to me in many ways, and ironically was around the same age as my own father would have been had he stayed alive. So there was a kind of connection there that I felt was bigger than either of us and bigger than this role or this franchise that brought us together. And so that was something I could never have imagined. And he was cool. I mean, he got it. He knew what I was about, and he knew that I could bring some integrity, I think, and some authenticity to that role, and he supported me in any way he could.
Well, I guess with Spock you can't really bring, there's only a limit to how much you can bring authenticity, for example, because Spock really is quite emotionless. How obviously when you approach acting you have to try, and usually you're told, oh, it's all about getting the accurate emotion for that role. Whereas with Spock, yeah, like I said, you didn't have that. How did you approach that?
Yeah, it is more challenging. I felt more, you know, there are, it's absolutely right, there are fewer ways to express a deep emotional life. Part of what many actors get to experience is the opportunity to release emotion, and Spock really challenged me in the sense of having to cultivate an emotional well, but not be able to pour it anywhere, to have to contain it. And it is an interesting challenge, but it's also one that I feel is a part of my own journey anyway. I feel like my interior life is always much more, I would say, tumultuous in a way than my exterior persona would ever indicate. So I understand what it is to have a lot going on inside and not necessarily always show it. And maybe that has something to do with the experience that I had as a child losing my father, or having to go through things in a way that made me turn inward. But an interior life is something that one quality that I feel I possess as a person and as an actor, which is directly in line with the characters. So that was one of those boxes that I could check off, and I think one of the reasons why I felt so appropriate for that role.
You talked about looking inward, and I guess this might be a good point to raise another defining sort of moment in your life was when you did that New York Times interview and came out as gay. And what led you to decide to come out in that way, in that format?
Well, it's interesting.
Thought process behind that.
Yeah, it was actually New York Magazine. I had done, a year before, I was doing a production of Angels in America at the Signature Theater in New York. And that was a watershed moment for me, because that is arguably, you know, one of, if not the best American play written in the last 50, 100 years. I mean, it's such a masterpiece, and the opportunity to work on that play was so significant for me creatively and personally as a gay man to enter into that world, to delve into all of the writing and all of the research that I did about what it was to be alive in New York City at that time, or, you know, in America, in the world, but particularly New York City, and what a devastating period of time that was, you know. I think my generation and your generation aren't nearly as connected to that, but you know, you imagine if you're sitting in this section of this room and it's a restaurant in New York City, at least 10 or 15 people here would be emaciated, covered in sores. And this was how people walked around the city. An entire generation of gay men were decimated. Incredibly talented, incredibly powerful men who were just wiped out. And so as a gay man who had not yet stepped into that version of myself, that authentic, fully realized version of myself, I knew when I did Angels in America that it was going to be something that I had to confront, first for me and then in a larger way. And I was open. I mean, I wasn't hiding anything, not from myself and not from the people in my life. But publicly, I just hadn't acknowledged my sexual orientation. And I did a big profile in the New York Times when I was doing Angels in America. And the journalist asked me, not directly if I was gay, but asked me what it was like to have people speculate so much about my sexuality. He basically gave me the opportunity to come out in that moment, in that profile. And I didn't take it. And in fact, I deflected the question by saying something like, you know, I'd much rather focus on the work that I'm doing. I mean, I gave some bullshit answer. And I really missed an opportunity at that time, but I wasn't ready, and circumstances hadn't lined up yet for it to be a decision that I was ready to make. So I had that creative experience, and I don't know how my trajectory would have unfolded had I not done Angels in America. But a year later, I produced a film. The first film that I made with my production company is called Margin Call. And I was on the press junket for that film. So what I did instead of coming out when I was doing Angels in America is I did an It Gets Better video. In that summer, around that time in 2010 and 11, there were quite a number of teenage suicides in the United States, LGBTQ kids who were killing themselves at a pretty alarming rate. And they were making the press, and it was kind of the advent of attention being paid to bullying, and particularly bullying as it attributed to those suicides. And so I made an It Gets Better video. Do you all know about that campaign that was done? So I made an It Gets Better video without having come out publicly, sort of saying to people like, yeah, you know, like, I support you, basically. And I listed the names of a number of kids who killed themselves, and you know, I felt like I was doing something, right? I wasn't doing everything, but I was doing something. And then when I was doing this press tour for Margin Call, this young kid called Jamie Rodemeyer killed himself. And in the wake of his suicide, it came to light that he had also made an It Gets Better video months before he killed himself. And that, to me, was staggering, actually. The way that I felt when I found that out and when I watched that video and was confronted with my own hypocrisy, you know, living this successful and in many ways enviable life, having amazing creative opportunities and personal opportunities and professional opportunities, and not standing up in a way that could save a life felt like something I couldn't bear. It just was totally anathema to who I am. And so I decided myself to come out. I didn't tell anybody. Nobody in my life knew, not my publicist or my agents or anybody. I showed up to a profile interview that I was doing for the New York Magazine in this cafe in New York. And I knew that I was going to do it. And so my heart was beating, you know, and I was super nervous. And the journalist was talking about things and brought up Angels in America. And I used that as my opportunity to refer to myself as a gay man. And then, like, you could see him, he was like taking notes and like listening. And as soon as I said, you know, as a gay man, he stopped, the pen just stopped. And he just sort of glanced up at me, and I could tell that he knew what I was doing, but I wasn't sure that he knew what I was doing. So I kept talking, and in my head I was like, did he get it? Like, does he know what this is, you know? And so then I referred to myself as a gay man a second time, a little bit later in the interview, and that's how I did it. And then I went home and called my publicist and my friends and said, just so you all know what's gonna happen when this article comes out. It came out like a week or two later. And then I wrote, I had a website at the time, and I wrote my own sort of follow-up after the article came out. I wrote my own sort of follow-up explaining myself. I'm sure you could find it on the deep web if you were so inclined, but I sort of expressed why I did it, and why I did it was because I felt like it was a responsibility that I had, so that kids didn't die.
It's quite unusual to go from that step of having not told anyone and then coming out immediately and then actually telling your friends and family afterwards.
Well, no, I didn't tell them I was gay. They all certainly knew that by then. I wasn't in the closet is the thing. It wasn't like I was living this life where I just told them that I did it publicly. But no, I wasn't. I was totally out to all my friends, and you know, had a boy. I mean, I was like totally fine in my life, but it was the step of public acknowledgement that I hadn't taken, and that was the thing to me that was the delineation, and the thing that I felt was important on a social level and on a political level, and that I had a responsibility for myself. Not everybody feels that way, you know. Certainly, people are more concerned with themselves and their own careers, more than they are concerned with the well-being of other people, and I have no judgment about that, other than to say that's not me, and it couldn't be me.
Well, I doubt. I guess you sort of just told your story about coming out, like you say, publicly when you're already famous and things, and that probably doesn't resonate with many people in here, because I doubt many people in here are famous. What about the process of coming out to your friends and family then? How did that?
I mean, I came out late. I was 24 when I came out to my family, and that was, to me, sort of the marker. You know, I had been out to friends before that in college, but I came out, you know, I think in this day and age, people come out a lot younger, you know, and there's less Sturm und Drang about it now than there was even 20 years ago, you know. And I think that's amazing. You know, we've made incredible progress socially and politically. With regard to LGBTQ integration and equality, and I think that tolerance is a bad word. I think, to me, it doesn't really go the distance. You know, integration, acceptance, acknowledgement, and infusion of power is the goal, right? And I think the only way that that's possible is with attention being paid and acknowledgement and people standing up and saying, this is who I am. And that's happening more and more in our world. And I think that's a real one way that we can look at our evolution in a positive light, I think. You know, counterbalanced by the many negative ways that we can see us moving forward as a civilization and as societies. But to me, I feel like I came out, you know, I was raised Catholic. I was, you know, raised in a social environment which it wasn't fully accepting, you know. I was definitely raised with the belief that it was wrong, that it was not, you know, desirable, that it was a hard life. And so it took me a little longer than most, certainly than most today, I would say. But I'm of a different generation, so I had it easier than the people before me, and we have it easier than the people before that. You know, I mean, it's a progression, and we have to acknowledge that.
Okay, well, I think now might be a good moment to open up to the audience, if you're happy to do so. So if you go just in the front here, yeah, you.
Hi, Zach.
Hi.
Thanks very much for the opportunity to ask a question. You talked about roles, and particularly in the case of Spock, and certain characteristics that you felt you had in common with him. When you select a role, I believe you're quite particular about roles you choose. Do you feel that you have to have something intrinsically that resonates with the character, or is there something else that you feel is important when you select a role? And maybe I can squeeze in a second question. Now that J.J. Abrams is coming back to do Star Wars Episode 9, are you going to show up in that as well?
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, I feel like there are certain qualities of characters that I like to feel some connection to when I take a job, but not always. You know, I have a history of playing really dark characters in certain shows, like when I decided to play Dr. Thredson in American Horror Story, you know, who's a serial killing rapist who skins women alive. I mean, there's not very much about that character that I can relate to. I should hope. But there's a complexity to that character psychologically that I find really interesting and that I find magnetic and that draws me into what it would be to embody him and to explore that psychological terrain. And so I feel like I believe as an actor, I believe that you have to be able to love the character you're playing on some level. You have to find love love is the key, I think, in every way. Ultimately, it comes down to that, or it should come down to that. And I think a lot of the troubles that we have in our thinking, societally and politically, is that it's devoid of compassion and love. Certainly our current American administration is entirely devoid of it, really. So how do you love a character who does these reprehensible things, and how do you find a way into that? And for me, it was about, well, you can't love the behavior, you can't love the character now, but you can love the child. So where was the child destroyed psychologically or emotionally to the point that they thought that this was an answer, or that this was and factoring in mental instability or mental illness, I think, is another thing. So those things are interesting to me. I don't feel those things in myself emotionally, but I'm interested in exploring them. Yeah, you know what? Maybe I'll be in Star Wars. Why not? At this point, I feel like, I think we had some secret hopes that JJ would come back and direct our fourth Trek film, if and when we make it. But I think this news puts a nail in that coffin. So, I want to work with JJ again. If it means I have to put on a stormtrooper outfit to do it, then maybe it's time to cross-pollinate.
Fans across the world are gasping at that now.
We'll see. Spread the word. It worked the first time.
Let's go in the center here.
Hi. So he asked about what roles, how you identified with a role. Is there any role you'd like to play in the future? Where do you see yourself going?
I really would love to do something immersive, right? I'd like to disappear into a character soon. Whether that's a character who is a historical figure, or it's a fictional character that I can really create, with a physicality and hair and makeup team, and really disappear into a role. That's something that I haven't had an opportunity to do, and I think it's something that I would welcome. I know it's something that I would welcome. So I'm looking for ways to do that now, having a lot of conversations about what that means and how to get there. But that's something that is clarifying for me. I'm not the kind of, I definitely am the kind of person who, this is both a blessing and a curse, but I like to allow things to unfold and see where they're going to take me. I'm not like a huge planner. I know it when I see it, I know it when I read it, or I know it when I talk about it. But that's great until there's nothing unfolding, and then I'm sort of like, now what? And had I been more forward thinking, maybe there would be something right there to go into. But I have to trust that things will come, and so the way to do that, I think, is to be specific, and I'm trying to get more specific about what that looks like. So thanks for asking, because that helps me get specific.
Great. Let's go at the front here.
From the way that you talk about coming out publicly, it sounds a lot to me like you did it more out of a sense of duty to the community over a strong personal imperative. So if this is the case, I was wondering if you had any thoughts or even advice on how to navigate personal identity and social activism simultaneously?
Mm-hmm. Well, my personal imperative was to, I guess, in a way, to serve the community. I don't really see it that way. I mean, it was a personal imperative. It was, if I could have, I bet at the time, if I could have not made that decision, I probably would have not made that decision, because I had not made it up to that point. So what was the difference for me was I literally couldn't bear it anymore. Like I couldn't live with myself I just couldn't do it. So it was a personal imperative. I just believe it's about standing up and saying, this is who I am. And visibility is the key to power. Visibility is the key to integration. You think about how much we accomplished in such a short amount of time, just legislatively in the United States, with regard to marriage equality and the LGBTQ movement. And how on the heels of that, The transgender movement has, the visibility with regard to the transgender movement has allowed so much progress to be made in even a shorter amount of time. So I think there's a lot to be said for just standing up and saying, this is who I am. There's, overcoming fear.
Let's come just, you here. Sorry to make you walk around.
Kind of going off of that, on the heels of that, I'm very curious, as you said you were kind of mid-20s when you came out to your family, but you were out to your friends. I know that I'm sure there's people in this room who are kind of thinking about it, who are still in the closet, or maybe who have come out to only a close circle of people. I'm curious about what advice you would kind of, pass on, or something that you think that people should know to kind of comfort and kind of like what strategies helped you, live during those days when you were not out of the closet.
Mm-hmm. I used to write a lot. I used to journal a lot, more than I do now. And that was helpful because it allowed me to understand what was in the way. It's good to be able to see what's in the way, I think, and what's in the way is the way. So it's like you have to get through that before you can come out on the other side, no pun intended. I think, knowing that your journey is your journey, and that, yes, in an ideal world, you'll have support from your nuclear family and your, those people who are closest to you. But if you don't have that support, there's strength that you can derive from that conflict. I was lucky and I had the support, and I know not everybody is. So I think it's a matter of knowing what's preventing it, and ultimately, I almost can guarantee you it comes down to fear. And so what are you afraid of, and why are you afraid of it, and what's the worst that can happen? Parents don't stay mad at you forever. They can't. They're your parents, They'll come back around eventually. And if they don't, then there are a lot of LGBTQ people who I think look at their chosen family as their family, and that's a unique gift. So then choose wisely, I would say.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just go straight behind.
Thank you very much for all that you have done for the queer community. But also on that question, something that was quite controversial. I remember in 2015 going to the Sundance Film Festival, and I am Michael. And I was wondering what you thought of that portrayal of an ex-gay pastor becoming, on that aim to be straight, and whether that was valuable to the community or not. Because I know particularly, I watched it with my mother, and she turned to me and said, well, there's some queers on TV that even think they could do it, and she's very accepting. She came to Pride with me, and etc. But I was wondering whether you thought that was maybe a setback, or it was maybe just for artistic merit.
Well, I certainly don't think it was a setback. He's referring to a film I made called I Am Michael that I did with James Franco, in which James plays a guy who was openly gay and an advocate for the community, and then had a spiritual awakening and believed that part of that awakening was a realization that he was in fact not gay, and went through a long process of reconciling himself to that fact, and then ended up meeting a woman and marrying a woman, and is now a pastor. But it wasn't about conversion therapy. It wasn't about. I responded to that story because it was a unique exploration of almost a reverse coming out story, and I found it interesting, and I guess I understand how it could have been perceived as controversial if anybody had seen it, but I don't feel like I felt like it was an interesting psychological exploration of this particular story, not a general application of trying to convince people that they're not gay. And I responded, I played the role of that man's boyfriend who was incredibly sure of who he was, and incredibly loyal, and incredibly open and compassionate. And so I responded to that character in a way where I did feel like there were qualities in myself that I wanted to magnify. So yeah. I mean, I hope that I hope that it didn't give people the notion that I think that it's not an organic aspect of a person's makeup and identity. You know, I certainly do believe that.
Yeah, I personally thought it was a great exploration of sexual fluidity.
Yeah,
It was
right.
rather my mother was quite perturbed.
Well, you know, that could be generational.
Let's go. You've got a very tall hand, so let's go there.
Thank you. I'm really amazed by your wonderful performance at the TV series Hero, and it's still one of my favorite. As you just entered the hall, I thought, wow, Sylar's coming. Maybe I should keep a distance. But if in reality you're given a chance to have one superpower besides Sylar's, which one would you choose?
Invisibility.
Why is that?
Because then I wouldn't have to wait in lines.
Yeah, let's go to the front here. Yeah.
Hi. Thank you for give the opportunity to ask a question. My question is, you mentioned that in the future you want to do a role that is immersive and you take on roles that you can identify with, that you want to explore. Would you share a bit more about how do you go about getting into character and how do you make sure that your own identity stays separate from the character?
It depends on the role and it depends on the medium for me. You know, like I feel if it's a historical project, then research becomes more important. Or if it's set in a particular world that I can learn about, I do. But it's different. It's different each time, you know. And like the immersive role that I'm talking about generally would be something that I think I would approach more from what we would call outside in, right? So, you know, modifying the physicality, or Richard III might be considered a role that could be approached from that perspective because the physicality is such an important part of who that character is. You know, and again, like, it's different from theater to film and TV because in theater you show up and you have 8 hours of rehearsal every day and you get to kind of live in this world and play around and do different things and you're telling the story chronologically. In film and television, you show up and you might shoot the last scene first on your first day. You might shoot the last scene of the episode or the series or the movie. So how do you prepare yourself emotionally for that? You have to track your journey. You have to really be able to know where that scene fits in and what you have to do to match the emotional level that you start that scene with the emotional level of the scene that precedes it. And that might be, you know, 3 scenes ago in the film, because there might be 3 scenes between that one and this one that you're not in. So it becomes much more technical, I would say, except when the cameras are rolling. Then I think it becomes much more instinctual and much more about connecting to your character in an impulsive way and honoring those impulses and instincts, you know. And in terms of separating myself from the roles, I haven't ever had too much trouble leaving a character at work. You know, I feel like I understand from a technical side of things because I trained for many years, so I understand how to kind of get to places and then turn it off, you know. It's like that great story about Dustin Hoffman and Sir Laurence Olivier when they were doing Marathon Man, and Dustin Hoffman showed up one day having not slept for 48 hours, looking disheveled. You know, his character had been going through all of this trauma and turmoil, and he shows up looking a mess, and, you know, Olivier says, you know, what's going on with you? And he's like, oh, I got to get into it, you know, I'm here. And Olivier just looked at him and said, my dear boy, why don't you try acting? You know, it's that kind of thing. It's like, you know, you got to know what you're showing up for, but then you also have to know how to leave it behind, I think. That's just how I am. You know, some people are more method, and sometimes I get that way. It just depends. It just depends on the mood and the role and the project.
Great. Yeah, let's go in the middle there. Yeah, you here.
Hiya. So you were talking about coming out publicly, which, if I may say, is a fantastic use of your position for the greater good in a way. But did obviously this might be a contentious issue, but did coming out publicly in the way that you did it affect, for example, the work that you chose afterwards, or the work that indeed you were offered afterwards?
You know, it's a tricky question because I don't have any comparison because I didn't stay in. I came out, so I can't tell you what I would have been offered or what would have happened for me had I not come out in terms of work opportunities.
But did you notice a significant change at all?
I do feel like there is a strong undercurrent of homophobia in the entertainment industry, and I don't believe that it's evolved in concert with our society at large. I do believe that there are opportunities that I might have had I not come out that I'll never know, but that I do believe that. Do I care? No, ultimately not, because I still have a lot of amazing opportunities, and I have the added bonus of knowing that I've made a difference in people's lives, and that is really, ultimately, I think the only thing that we can judge ourselves by in the end. You know, what I might have gotten to play, I don't know, a different superhero, another superhero, but 50 more kids might have taken their lives over a decade, you know? I mean, is that worth it? Not to me. In the end, it wasn't, you know? So I don't know, I feel like we've made progress, we're making progress. Again, it comes back to that thing of visibility. I think people care a lot less now than they did 10, 15, 20 years ago, but they still care. And people are still afraid, especially in the middle, you know, the middle states of our country, in the red states, in the mid zone, in the flyover states. It's like, and those are the people that show up week after week and buy tickets to the movie theaters. So big studios are less inclined, you know, to take those kinds of risks, I guess. But I don't see them as risks. I just see them as evolved thinking, and we're still working on that part of it. But we're getting there.
That's very inspiring. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, let's just go. Yeah, you on the end. Yeah.
Thanks. So you've touched on American politics a little bit, hinted at it, and I think in the U.S., the election was seen as distressing for a lot of individuals, especially people in certain communities, and you've kind of seen at least I've seen, a new level of celebrity activism that was maybe missing earlier in this decade. And I'm curious if you view your role as a public figure differently, given what's going on in American politics, or if you think it's kind of the same in how you see your community shifting into more of a political role, given how emotional this is.
I think personally, I am in a place of, because I am politically minded and politically aware and have been incredibly politically involved over the last 10 years. I campaigned pretty hard for Barack Obama in both of the presidential elections, and campaigned a lot for against Prop 8 and in favor of marriage equality until it became law. But I was so shocked. I remember where I was the night that I found out Donald Trump was running for president. I was at an event for GQ in New York, and I was doing the press line, and the journalist from the magazine asked me, and that's how I found out that he was running there. So, you know, Donald Trump today announced his presidency, his candidacy for president. Do you have any comment on that? And I said, you're fired. As a joke. I mean, I was like, this is a total fucking joke. And so for me, like, the next year and a half was just a series of like mind-boggling, unfathomable disappointments. And so I was incredibly demoralized and really numbed by the fact that he won. It's a disgrace. It's an absolute disgrace. I'm ashamed of our country. I mean, it's horrific, horrific. The damage that he's doing to the world and to our standing in the world is absolutely abominable to me. And he's a disgusting person to me. So it's really hard because I feel impassioned about it. But I also feel like I'm observing, and I'm learning, actually, how can I make a difference? How can I possibly enter this fray? Because part of his destructive technique is, and it's become more and more and more transparent with the disaster in Puerto Rico, his despicable handling of that, you know, his unwillingness to stand up against an automatic weapons ban in our country after what happened there this week. I mean, horrifying stuff. And so he's become more and more transparently concerned with his base and catering to and instigating his base and speaking to them in a way that empowers them. And I'm not yet prepared to stand up against that because it's unprecedented, really, because it has nothing to do with political decorum. It has nothing to do with intelligent, meaningful discourse. And so I'm just in a moment of a little bit numb, frankly, and that's not good, and a little bit curious as to how this is going to unfold. And one of the ways that I'm doing that is kind of acknowledging who in the midterm elections in our country might make a difference, who's going to emerge soon to be a potential opposing force. You know, I've heard people talking in our country about him being reelected, you know, and talking about it with some kind of certainty. And at this point, I guess I feel like anything is possible. But we're in very, very, very bad shape as a country. And so I'm hopeful that, you know, and I do believe on some level that as a recognizable figure and as somebody who holds at least some attention in the public eye, that there's a responsibility to have the conversation. But these aren't people who want to have a conversation. These are people who are racist, xenophobic, bigoted, and they've been empowered by this monster. So I got to figure out how to get in there, but I don't know yet.
Thanks.
I think we've got time for just a couple more. Let's go back row here.
Just continuing on the subject of American politics, what were your thoughts on the US recent refusal to support a UN resolution condemning the death penalty worldwide for various things, including homosexuality?
Yeah, I just read that the other day, and I didn't read much about it, so I only caught like the headline and the top lines of that article. Nikki Haley, right?
They said that their reason for refusing to support it was that they thought there was an undercurrent of condemning the death penalty for everything, and they obviously love the death penalty. So
it's not funny. I guess I would say my response is disappointed but not surprised. You know, I mean, there is no integrity in this administration whatsoever. So yeah, I mean, what can I say? It's one of a litany of issues on which we have regressed almost generations in the span of less than a year. So again, visibility, again, advocacy, again, standing up and empowering people in those places and, you know, just educating ourselves. But I don't know, I mean, it's just like, yeah, sure, all right. It's horrible.
Yeah, let's go, yeah, to you. Yeah. You look very surprised by...
Hello. First, I wanted to say quickly, as a Russian citizen, I can really sympathize with your concerns for politics in your country. And I just wanted to ask, what do you think could be done for the LGBTQ community in countries like Russia or Azerbaijan or Iran, which are still quite struggling with accepting LGBTQ people?
Ooh, that's a tough question. I mean, you know, I would have said 2 years ago that we can lead by example, you know. And I think one of the most difficult aspects of what this administration has espoused is that we can't lead by example anymore. So I think as a community, there are ways to, just in the same sense of bringing attention to what's happening, to getting the word out there, you know, and letting people know just how barbaric some of these countries are in dealing not only with LGBTQ issues, but many other issues of civil rights, you know. So I think it's about shining light on these places, Russia and Chechnya and places in the Middle East. And, you know, I definitely feel like it's about magnifying and amplifying the struggle and giving people a lifeline in any way we can. Is there a way to help people escape? Is there a way to help people get out? Is there a way to help people avoid these honor killings and political persecution that's happening in places all over the world? Yeah, there's a television show that, I don't know if you all get Vice here, or Viceland is the TV arm of it, but Ellen Page makes a show called Gaycation. And she and one of her best friends, who's also gay, go around the world to these places and interview people there so that that people can understand more fully the struggles. And I was inspired to see that show. Kind of wish I had gotten there first in a way. You know, that was a great idea, I feel, to confront the issues directly and to engage the people so that you can understand what they need as well. You know, I think asking people, how can we help you, is probably the best place to start, because I have no idea how to, you know, infiltrate the shroud of, you know, secrecy and political power in a place like Russia. I'll never willingly go there again. I've been to Russia a couple of times, and so, you know, one thing I know I won't do is accept invitations to that country. But how can we do it? And I think engaging people directly is the place to start.
Thank you.
We have time for one more. Yeah, let's go. Right here.
Yeah, bring you guys into this. Hi guys, sorry.
Hi.
Hi.
So you talked a bit about the responsibility you felt as someone in the public eye to share an aspect of your personal life. I was wondering, what do you think of the kind of scrutiny and fixation bordering on obsession sometimes that performers come under, both from the media and to a certain extent from fans? Do you sometimes find it odd, or do you think it's quite an important part of our culture and a good platform to use?
Well, I think it's a symptom, really, of the denigration of privacy. You know, there's this great documentary called "We Live in Public." It was probably, I don't remember what year it was made. It was directed by Andy Timiner. And it was about this this guy who made a bunch of money in the tech boom of the 90s, and the way he decided to spend a lot of his money was to create these public art pieces, these public, art pieces, site-specific kind of pieces that showed where it was all going. And before any of it, you know, before any of it happened, he kind of had the line on what it was going to be, this kind of voyeuristic sense of living to be seen and living to be witnessed and living for other people. And it culminated in the New Year's of Y2K. He rented this bunker in New York City, and I think it was for like, I haven't seen it in a long time, so some of the details are blurry, but I think it was for like a week or 10 days or something. He invited people to come into this bunker, and they had everything that they ever could want, food and alcohol, and there was even a room with guns where you could go and shoot guns, and it was all terribly illegal in the end. And you were welcome here. He invited certain tastemakers of that era and editors of magazines and people who were just interested in, there was a lot of, y'all were probably a bit too young, but there was a lot of anticipation of what would happen at the year, the turn of the century, as it were. Bless you. And so he invites all these people down, and the only thing you have to do is agree to a very thorough questionnaire that you have to fill out about yourself and your personal life. You have to agree to wear a uniform, so you give up your own clothes and you wear like a, sort of uniform, jumpsuit kind of thing. You have to give your social security number, and you have to agree to be filmed the entire time you're there. And then this documentary explores the ensuing chaos. And so I think there is something incredibly chaotic about, and you should watch it because it's pretty spectacular. The project ends up getting shut down because of the guns, as you might imagine. But you should watch it because it was like prescient, it was like it saw where we were going and how voyeuristic our culture would become. So I think it's real unfortunate, and I think there's no way to turn it around, starting with Facebook and then with Twitter and then with Instagram and who knows, Snapchat, and I don't know what else there is, but we all live to be seen. And I'm, oh, was that someone Snapchat or something? Yeah, of course. Yeah. So, it's like, how can you use it? I see it as an output model. For me, it's like I really use it as a platform to share things that I'm interested in, but I don't know, I feel conflicted about it, I really do. There are times when I really want to delete it from my phone, and then I'll do it, and then I'll be like, I gotta put it back, like I can't. So it's got its hooks in us, and I try to use it for good, and I try to kind of keep it, I only use Instagram, that's the only thing I do. I've never had Facebook. I can't imagine what my life would be if I had Facebook. I mean, it seems like such a constant barrage of like just inanity and things you don't need or want to really know, but it's become this, it's changing how our brains are wired, isn't it, right? So I don't know, I think it's a really complicated thing. I do think people are more empowered to intrude on other people's lives, but not just celebrities, regular people too, or people who are just living more conventional lives. But it used to be that celebrity meant that you were good at something. You were a celebrity because you were celebrated for a skill, a talent, a commitment, and that's just not the case anymore. And it's sad, but I think it's here to stay. So you are the minds who will shape that moving forward, and you are the people who will define how we integrate it and how we allow technology to be a tool of opportunity instead of a tool of destruction. So as you all begin your school year, bear that in mind. This is an incredibly precarious time for all of us. And you are the minds that will shape where we go. It's pretty humbling for me to be here and talking to you all. And, I really wish you genuinely luck. Really, good luck and Godspeed, and take care of yourselves and take care of each other, and ultimately you'll be taking care of all of us. So thank you for having me. It's been a real honor to be here. Yeah.